Hi guys! Today we're going to look at unique learning systems, communication skills, which are May lesson number 14. May lesson 14. It's communication skills related to moving to a new apartment. You also have a problem-solving game board and some scenario cards from May lesson 7. Oh my, what's happening here? Hold on just a second. All right, we'll try that again. You should have gotten a copy of the problem-solving game in the mail along with problem-solving cards. So what you can do with these cards is cut them out and then use this as a game board to play the problem-solving game. You're going to need to find one die or a couple dice, but you can roll and you move the number you get. So if you roll a 4, you move 1, 2, 3, 4, and it says move ahead 2 spaces. And then you would draw a card from your pile. I am hoping that we can play this game together on Zoom one of these days soon when we do an evening hangout. When we're playing the game, you also have a copy of this at home. It's called Solving a Problem, and it walks you through step-by-step questions to ask to help you identify the problem, determine if it's an emergency, who can help, how you can get help, and what you can say. And the cool thing about this, if you log on to your student view, or if you look at your last page, is you have word and picture options to help you answer those questions. So this is a good way to practice problem solving for situations that might come up when you are living on your own or living with family. And again, that's Unique Learning Systems, May lesson number 7, if you want to log into this student view. Today we are reading the communication lesson, which is May lesson 14, if you want to look at this on your computer as well. I'm going to share our objective with you. And this lesson has 2 objectives because we're going to look at our communication poster. So our first objective is to identify and demonstrate the correct way to start a conversation. So we're going to look at that poster and we're going to practice identifying the correct way to start a conversation. How do you start a conversation with someone? Should you look at them and smile, or should you look at the floor? You should look at them and smile. So that's your objective for this first part when we're talking about starting a conversation. The second part, we're going to read a story about a young man named Ted. While we read the story, you will identify when Ted is following or breaking a communication rule. So we're going to see if Ted can start a conversation the right way. First, let's take a look at our everyday communication poster. Starting a conversation. Remember, we talked about when you start a conversation, should you look at the person and smile or look at the floor? You should look at the person and smile. Then look at our poster. Step number 1 says, look at the person and smile. Step 2 is say, hi, how are you? Step 3 is listen. Listen so they can answer your question. So you say, hi, how are you? And then listen to hear if they say, good, how are you? Next, you can ask another question. What's a question you could ask? What did you do last night? Or what are your plans this weekend? Then listen for an answer. So remember the steps to starting a conversation. First, look at the person and smile. Say hi, how are you? Listen for their answer, and then ask another question to keep the conversation going. You can talk about the weather, sports, TV shows, try to find something in common, or ask what they've been up to. And make sure you stop and listen and show that you're listening by using good eye contact and a smile. So now that we've read about starting a conversation, we are going to read a story about Ted and identify if Ted is using good communication skills. Today, Ted is moving into his new apartment. He is ready to have his own place. He is excited to live independently and take care of himself. So Ted is not communicating so far. We're just learning about Ted. There's his apartment building. Ted is very happy and excited to have his own place and to be independent and take care of himself. Ted sees Nelson getting his mail. He lives in the apartment building too. So here's Ted, and there's Nelson, who also lives in the apartment building. And these are their mailboxes in apartment buildings. If you live in an apartment, you probably know this. You usually have a mailbox that you use a key to open. So Ted sees Nelson getting his mail. Nelson and Ted went to high school together, so they know each other. He is glad to see someone he knows. He waves and smiles. Is that a good way to get Nelson's attention? It sure is. Ted smiles and says, "Hi, Nelson, how are you?" Nelson smiles back. "I'm great. How are you, Ted?" Is Ted following the rules for starting a conversation? Let's see, we're on page 3. Let's look back at our poster. Ted looked at Nelson and smiled, and he said, "Hi, how are you?" Yes, so Ted is following the steps of starting a conversation. Then he listened to Nelson, and Nelson asked him how he was. All right, let's go back to our story. And Nelson said, "I'm great. How are you, Ted?" So Ted's listening. Then Ted said, "He is good." He tells Nelson that he just moved into the building. Nelson listens as Ted tells him about moving. So they're taking turns talking and listening. Those are good conversation skills. Nelson tells Ted that he lives in the apartment building with Terrence. So Nelson and Terrence live together. Now that Nelson is talking, what's Ted doing? He's listening. Is he using good communication skills? Yes. He's listening while Nelson talks. They're taking turns in the conversation. Terrence went to school with Ted too. Ted listens to Nelson. He is glad to know his old classmates live there too. So having this nice conversation with Nelson, Ted finds out some cool news that Terrence also lives in the building. Now Ted's excited because he has 2 classmates in the apartment building he just moved into. Now Ted tells Nelson he is glad they will be neighbors. So he listened to Nelson and then he responded. He asked another question. So he listened, he responded, and asked Nelson another question to keep the conversation going. Are those good communication skills? Yeah, good job, Ted. Way to keep it going. Ted asked Nelson if he wants to watch the basketball game with him next Friday. Nelson says, sure. So Ted keeps the conversation going by asking Nelson if he wants to do something together. Ted is making plans with his friend. Nelson tells Ted his phone number. Ted tells Nelson his phone number. They make plans to watch the game on Friday at 7 p.m. Now, we learned about making plans with friends in, I think, our March unit. And we talked about when you make plans with friends, it's important to know what time and what day, and to have each other's information, like phone numbers. And it looks like Ted and Nelson are being responsible with that. They already know each other's address because they live in the same building. They might want to ask each other what their apartment numbers are. Nelson remembers he has to leave for work. He says, "Ted, it was nice to see you, but I need to go to work now." He tells Ted that he and Terrence can help if he needs anything while setting up his apartment. Is Nelson using good skills to end the conversation? Yes, he is. He told Ted that it was really nice to talk, but it is time for him to go to work, so he's got to get going. He offered to help if Ted needs it, and he'll see him again. "Thanks," Ted says. "See you next Friday." So Ted ends the conversation by saying thank you and reminding him that they have plans next Friday. Ted goes back to his apartment. He is glad he was able to talk to Nelson. He is happy to know some people in his apartment building. The end. Were you able to identify some of the good communication skills Ted used? Ted took turns talking and listening. Ted looked at Nelson while they were talking. He smiled and said, "Hi, how are you?" Nelson also listened to Ted and took turns talking. They worked on plans and shared contact information. And Nelson politely ended the conversation, and so did Ted. Ted said, "Thank you, and I'll see you Friday." Ted used a lot of great skills to communicate with Nelson, and as a result, he's got plans with friends in his new apartment building already. I hope you can practice these skills with some of your friends from Pathways, either during a group Zoom or video call to each other, or call with me. I'll talk to you soon. I hope you have a great day. Bye.